How many of you have ever applied for a loan? A bank account, purchase something online? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then there's a company out there that has your personal information, and they're storing it in the cloud. That's why when Target got hacked and over 40 million people lost their credit cards and identities, you or somebody you know was affected. So you might be thinking, aren't these companies good at protecting our data? How did this happen? Well, Target was not hacked directly. They were hacked when a third-party HVAC vendor who is connected to Target's internal computer systems clicked on a phishing email. Now, 63% of all data breaches occur when third parties are involved. And what that means is that if you can stop third-party data breaches from occurring, you can stop the vast majority of these data breaches. So you might be wondering now, what are companies doing to ensure that their third-party vendors are going to handle your data securely? This is something I have firsthand experience with, having had the job to do this at one of the world's largest tech companies. And what I learned there is almost scary, which is that this is taking place in simple spreadsheets and over email. Now what that means is that a company like Target will create a questionnaire in an Excel document. They will ask questions about how you encrypt data in transit. Where's your data center located? Do you have door locks at your offices? And they'll email this to a vendor. The vendor will complete this assessment, fill in the blanks, and email it back. A document full of their security vulnerabilities being sent over email, one of the most insecure methods to transmit this kind of data. So how hard do you think it's going to be to start hacking that vendor now? Now, we had some assumptions about this whole market. One was that not only did my company feel this pain, but that it was felt across the industry and that it was expensive and inefficient to run these assessment programs. The next assumption was that quantifying the risk is really difficult for enterprises because they have so many spreadsheets to manage. And the last was that the process is extremely tedious, both for enterprises and their vendors. So we got out of the building and we talked to dozens of CTOs, CISOs, and VPs of security at both small, medium-sized businesses and public companies. What they told us is that it costs them on average $2,500 to assess each vendor annually. We also learned that these risk assessments aren't very insightful. What do you do when you have thousands of spreadsheets in all different places across your organization with different versions? It's really hard to do anything with those. And last, the vendors did indeed validate that this is one of their most tedious, hateful processes. So we had a hypothesis. If we could create one assessment to rule them all that would enable a vendor to answer this one assessment and then share the responses with all their enterprises, that would solve the problem. But the problem was, it didn't. The reason is, enterprises have different regulatory environments, they have different internal corporate policies and procedures, which means that they must be able to administer their own unique assessments, even if they're asking the same questions in many cases. Enterprises also have the leverage to force their vendors to comply with whatever assessment protocol they want, and they have the budget to afford solutions to manage this, so they're really driving the nature of the programs. So we learned that enterprises, not vendors, were our customer segment. And we also learned that while vendors loved the one assessment to rule them all concept, enterprises it wasn't going to work there, but they were really intrigued with the idea that we could solve their risk assessment problem in some other ways.
Now that we had enterprises intrigued, we really had to figure out what the value proposition was going to be for them. And we had a hypothesis that it would be three things. One, a platform online that would help them to manage the process of assessing their vendors. Two, a smarter risk scoring method that would allow them to quantify the risk with a vendor so they could quickly understand it. And three, a LinkedIn type network that would allow vendors and customers to quickly exchange the data. First person we talked to was a professor at BYU named Jeff Dotson. Jeff is a top 5 worldwide expert in a field called computational Bayesian statistics. And Jeff had a really interesting idea on how to rate and score the assessments for these vendors. Essentially, Jeff wanted to go to the crowd. He wanted to talk to IT and security professionals and find out what was most important to them when it came to security. And then take that information and bundle it up into a smart algorithm that could score these risk assessments. We thought this was a really cool idea, but what it meant for us was that we had to go and talk to real companies and see how they felt about it. We started by building really simple prototypes in Adobe Illustrator. So we built prototypes of the platform and the tools, of the network and how companies would view their vendors, and then also of this risk scoring methodology and how we would present the score. We took these prototypes and we've spoken with over 216 IT security professionals in these companies and many more. And when we go and present them with this value proposition, the overwhelming response is positive. We hear things like, if you have a beta list, put me on it. If you had this product today, I would buy it today. So we knew that the value proposition was right for them. The next logical question was, if we provided this value proposition, what would you be willing to pay for it? And again, the consistent response from both small and large companies was that they would pay $500 per vendor per year to manage their vendors on our platform. And they wanted it as a SaaS model, a recurring revenue model, so that they could constantly have access to their vendors. So we knew that there was value proposition. We knew that customers would be willing to pay for it. So we sat down with our CTO, Juan, and we began to architect this solution. And we wanted to build it not just to solve the customer's pain, but also so that it was secure and that it would scale. We had talked to 216 IT professionals. We figured out the value proposition, and we knew that they wanted it as a recurring revenue model.
So we came up with a few new hypotheses. One was that the current process of doing self-assessments was going to be sufficient on our own platform. The second was that enterprises would be willing to beta test with us. And the third was that if we brought on key partnerships with industry leaders, we would be able to have enough credibility to market to the broader market. We handpicked 6 beta customers from a variety of different industries and backgrounds to participate. And what they told us is that while self-assessments were good enough in the past because it's all they had, they really wanted us to figure out a way to verify that the vendors were doing what they said. So we talked to a couple IT and CPA audit firms to figure out if there was a way to do that. And these firms, Tanner and WSRP, suggested that we create a third log into the system that would allow an auditor to come in and put their stamp of approval on any particular question in the assessment as an independently verified thing. Then we talked to the Center of Innovation in Banking and Finance at the University of Utah, and they loved what we were doing and suggested that we become an approved vendor so that they could farm us out to financial institutions who also struggle with risk assessing. And last, we worked with the Cloud Security Alliance, a 75,000 member organization that creates one of the world's premier IT security professional certifications, and they love what we're doing and are going to help us. So we had nailed our key partnerships, had figured out an interesting channel with IT and security audit firms where we could help them bring in new customers and they could refer customers to us.
Today, we've worked with our beta customers with these prototypes to actually start building. And with their feedback, we've iterated on the product till today we have a minimum viable product that includes the platform, the risk scoring methodology, and the network. Now, the other thing that these companies need before they can start putting data on our platform is proof that we're secure. So we're excited to announce that just this week, we had a third-party audit firm complete their tests on our platform and essentially give us a clean bill to say that we're secure and customers can trust our platform. Which is exciting because in addition to these beta customers, we also have a pretty strong pipeline of customers that we've been working with who have been waiting on this security audit. And these 16 companies here actually represent 5,200 vendors that could potentially come onto our platform. They'll have accounts on our platform, and we believe that we can convert them to paying customers. So we found a pain in a market. We went out and we worked with that market to develop a solution. We found a value proposition for them that they're willing to pay for. And this represents a $3.2 billion annual opportunity. We worked with 6 beta customers to develop an MVP. And then we had a third party come along and test it and tell us that it's secure. So we can now go to our market. And these 5,200 vendors that we believe we can convert as paying customers. These companies are putting your data in the cloud. And the cloud is here to stay. And Whistic is going to make it safe to use. Thanks.
All right. Do our remote judges have any questions for Whistic? Yes, I have one question. Again, very nice work. Thank you for taking the time to tell us about it. You did talk to a number of customers, but I wasn't sure when I saw some of your early hypotheses. So, for example, you said you had 3 hypotheses about your value proposition. I wasn't sure how many customers you talked to and which of those 3 hypotheses were validated and in what way. Because we know from experience with hypotheses validation that often things don't end up quite what we thought. So could you give me more detail? How many customers and what were the results of those early tests?
Yeah, so this initial piece of testing, it took about 2 months, and we talked to about 20 companies. And there was a good mix of small companies and large companies. And the original assumption was that we could build one assessment that they would all be able to use, right? And these small companies who represented more like the vendor, they were really excited about it because they would love to take one assessment and share it with anybody. But the larger companies, these are the enterprises, they said, that's not going to work. We have our own assessment. We have our own policies based on our industry, and we're going to use that. And what we quickly saw was that these enterprises, they had the leverage in the relationship, and they also had the bigger checkbooks. And so we pivoted away from this idea of one assessment based on that initial 2 months of visiting in person with about 20 companies.
Thank you.
All right, our in-house judges, any questions for Whistic?
So I'm not exactly clear on the CPA component of it. So they're logging on and they're supposed to be validating what the vendors have put in the response to the questions?
That's exactly right. So a CPA firm would be invited to participate by the vendor. The vendor would say, yes, come on board and you can put your stamp of approval on my questions. It is a business arrangement between the CPA firm and the vendor. And so the vendor is the one who's paying for that validation.
Right. And so the CPA then, though, has to go on site and do like sort of a deep analysis whether this vendor has actually put in the correct information.
That's right. In some cases, there's a lot of testing that can be done over the wire.
Right, but they're going to charge some money for that. And so the one thing that I'm not seeing in all of this is that how does that affect these prices that they told you they were willing to pay? Because I'm guessing that you got a lot of that pricing information before they realized that they were going to have a CPA come in and audit them.
Yeah, so most companies that are selling to large organizations are already going through an audit. It's called a SOC 2, which means a CPA firm is already coming and auditing them. What this actually does for the CPA firm is allow them to get through the first phase of the audit process much quicker. In talking with these firms, they said a tool like this could save us about 40% of our engagement costs. So there's a big incentive for the CPA firm to use it to save their own costs, but also provide a service to the client. Now, from the client's perspective, most of them are going to have to get a SOC 2 anyways. And so what our platform does for them is it helps them to do it in a more simple way because we walk them through the process.
So at the very start of your presentation, you spoke about the big pain point that Target had. Have you guys presented to them, and what did they say?
We have not reached out to Target. We've been more focused regionally and just through contacts. But we do have one of our beta customers is in the Bay Area, Cadence Design Systems, and we're also talking with companies in the UK, but we have not specifically reached out to Target. We have, however, had recent contact with a company in Utah that had their data center hacked, and we happened to meet with the CIO 2 days before the news came out. He was very interested and invited us right back to meet with his team.
At $500 a year, you can't really afford a direct sales. The channel's critical.
Just to make sure you understand, it's $500 per vendor per year.
Per vendor.
So most companies will have anywhere from 10 to 1,000 vendors. So
Microsoft has thousands.
Okay. All right. So you could justify a direct sales effort if your channel strategy did not pay out. But can you actually deliver it directly, or does it require a channel? Is this something you guys could do, or are you going to have to go through a third-party channel? Because you had 2 interviews with channel, which seems your critical component here on making this work. And with 2 interviews, you don't have a lot of validation, or do you, on the channel?
What's really interesting about this is the network effect. So every company we have in our pipeline right now has just been direct contact. We've literally reached out to them through LinkedIn. And their CIOs have responded and said, yes, come please talk to us. Those 5,200 vendors, then become a channel for us as well. So our own customers become a channel when they bring their vendors in, because those vendors also have vendors.
I love the network effect. So coming from Utah, it's probably in your blood, right?
So, though I was like anti-brand last time, I actually have a brand question now. So,
Yeah.
In this realm of security and being this, you're essentially a trusted third party. So, why would these big corporations think that you are the guys to supply this?
I'm actually really glad you asked this question. We talked about Jeff Dotson's crowdsourced risk scoring algorithm. What's happening now is that you have an IT security manager who says, all right, company, trust me, I know what I'm doing. And they're one voice saying, we should bring this vendor on and trust them with our customers' social security numbers. The difference with Whistic is that Whistic isn't providing the expertise. We are providing a connection to an IT security crowd, hundreds or thousands of people who have the background to say, all right, we know what kind of controls this vendor has in place, and we can score them on a FICO type model so that the crowd actually validates for us. And we're building in the crowd into every single thing that we do to make sure that in wherever possible, we're using the crowd to validate what we've done.
And when we talk to CIOs and we tell them that, we say, you're actually going to be relying on 500 of your peers. The response is, that's actually really cool. They get pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I'm surprised nobody actually gave you any money.
You mean as revenue?
Yeah, like to code and develop if it was a big enough problem, and you guys were so sexy. Like, why wouldn't they just should find like 4 or 5 that would be like, let's get this going, let's implement it.
Yeah, I think it's because companies recognize that we've got to go through the validation process as well, and we've got to build, and it's got to be secure. And right now we're excited because we've gotten to the point where it's ready, and these customers are ready.
Thank you, Whistic.